Back with another reaction video, and this time I'm doing a requested reaction, and this is called "Was Timur the Greatest Conqueror Ever?" And this is by a channel called Hikmah History. I hope I'm saying that right. I'll probably find out if I said that right or not, but still. And again, this is a request. Now, I don't do all requests, but every now and again I do requests, and if I don't do your request, it's I apologize in advance, but this one I've been trying to do for a couple of weeks, so I'm a little bit catching up. So yeah, first time I've heard of this channel, Hikmah History, and apparently, let me just bring up the. Sorry, give me a sec. Yeah. So, if you're into your Islamic history, according to the description, Hikmah History is for you. Now, I have heard of Timur, even though he's called Timur the Lame. Well, because years ago I played medieval Total War, and very late on into the campaign, if I remember rightly, the Timurids would come in from the east. After you've had the difficulty of dealing with the Mongols, if you got that far, the Timurids would come in, and I believe the Timurids were sort of like descendant of the Mongols, from my limited knowledge. So but we're about to find out. So the usual disclaimer when I react to any historical content: if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, is probably obvious. I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments below. So with that being said, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and check out Hikmah History, and if you want to, feel free to subscribe and support the channel, their channel. And there's not much more I can say. So so I said everything I have to say, so I'll full screen that. Bring that up. I'll put that there for historical videos. And right, so without further ado, let's get into this.
Hikmah History presents
Oh, I have
Timur,
said it right.
or Tamerlane, the 14th and 15th century Turco-Mongolian conqueror who, in his quest to restore the authority of the great Mongol Empire, went on a legendary run of conquest that made him the most formidable man of his day. Considering his long list of achievements, it won't be too difficult to point out the plethora of lessons we can take away from his life. But first, some context. Timur was born around 1336 near Samarkand, a major center of Transoxiana, which is a region in Central Asia. He was,
which I remember lightly, was I think someone did point out years ago, because when I was reacting to I think it was Kings and Generals or History March, about their subject about the Mongols and Genghis Khan, and one of the places they invaded was part of a sort of Turkish, sort of Persian empire, not the one that we're used to, but another one, the Khwarezm. That was just sort of Turkish, someone might have said. Someone will have to remind me, but yeah, that was the heart of the Khwarezm Empire, was Samarkand or Bukhara. But anyway, I'm not going to get into too much detail, so...
Born into the Barlas tribe, which was Mongolian but had been heavily Turkicized since their
Wow.
immigration to the area in the aftermath of the Mongol invasion in the 1220s, hence the phrase Turco-Mongolian. Now, Timur's tribe was different from that of Genghis Khan and his descendants, who were from the imperial Borjigin clan. This is going to be important to remember for our story later on. Bear in mind that the Mongol Empire had been divided into 4 sections after it had become too big to control during the 13th century. And Timur grew up in a time when Mongol-held lands were in particular disarray. The Ilkhanate of Persia and Mesopotamia ceased to exist in the 1330s. The Golden Horde of Russia and Eastern Europe would soon encounter violent internal political disorder that was to directly put them at odds with Timur himself. The Yuan dynasty of China would soon find themselves at the receiving end of major rebellions and uprisings. And lastly, the Chagatai Khanate of Central Asia had become divided in the 1340s. Timur was raised in the Western Chagatai Khanate, which was racked with conflict and lack of rule of law. An underlying tension which led to some of this chaos was a clash between the nomads who retained their ancestors' mobile lifestyle versus the Chagatai rulers who had become sedentary, meaning they settled into city life. In the 1360s, the Western Chagatai was so weak that it was invaded by the Eastern Chagatai, also known as Mughal-istan. Sound familiar?
Wow.
Let me take away the Istan. Ah, like the Mughals of India, right? Exactly. After all, Babur, the first Mughal emperor, was also a descendant of Timur, which you would have known if you had watched the video on the Battle of Panipat we did. The term Mughal actually comes from the Persian word for Mongol. Back to our story. When the area was invaded, Timur was made chief of the Barlas tribe, probably because he was deemed easy to manipulate because of his young age. Oh boy, this is not going to end well. Timur was far too ambitious to be satisfied with his share, so he got himself involved in intrigues and plots, which led to him being ousted and subsequently turning to banditry for survival.
Wow.
At one point, it is said that his following was reduced to a mere handful. It is in this period that he gets the name Tamerlane, or Timur the Lame, from. His right leg was crippled whilst he lost 2 fingers in his right hand, most likely as a mercenary.
I forgot that lame was also a term for people who were crippled. Yeah, because as I said, I'm almost clueless about Timur the Lame, so...
In the service of a minor Khan, or that he was shot as a result of stealing sheep, but this could easily be the propaganda of the anti-Timur.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how the Mongols pretty much started out, near enough. Because even though Genghis Khan was the one to really unite the tribes for the most part, and the only one that it was sort of kind of debatable who Genghis Khan's main rival was. Is either the person was either known as Kushluk or Jamuga, but as I said, there's loads of videos about talking about the Mongols, but I'm just saying, a long story short, it kind of sounds like how the Mongols supposedly started out.
Timurid author Ibn Arab Shah. Despite his physical burdens, Timur's talent in military matters allowed his mercenary career to flourish, soon attracting a large following. Together with his brother-in-law Hussein, Timur gained control of Transoxiana and they divided it amongst themselves. A lot of backstory so far. When does his run of conquest begin, damn it?
Oh, I am using YouTube's captions, so sorry if some of the subtitles don't match to what the narrator is talking about.
Relax, I'm getting to that. First, his wife needs to die. That's gonna allow him to attack Hussein, his brother-in-law, and also partner in crime. One of the reasons Timur triumphed over Hussein was because, believe it or not, Timur was a very generous man. He shared his spoils of war with people, whilst his brother-in-law was perceived as being selfish. As much as we like to assume the leader of a tribal group has to be a rugged alpha male, generosity is a key component of winning trust within a nomadic setting. After
Well, it's called. It's I think by who had the most will to be leader is sort of more. I would say Mongols, but also Huns, if I remember rightly. Because when it came to the Huns, it, from what my limited memory allows, I think it's like it wasn't by divine right or who had royal blood. It was by who had the strongest will. And Attila, after killing his brother, became the leader of the Huns. But again, that's a long story short.
besieging and killing his brother-in-law at Balkh in 1370, Timur was ready to start his
But feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong.
epic run of conquest. Right? Wrong. Before setting his sights on faraway expeditions to Russia or India, Timur was pressed by the need to secure his holdings in his immediate surroundings. So he spent the 1370s consolidating his power in Central Asia by weakening neighboring states and reducing them to vassalage. Okay, remember how Timur was not actually from Genghis Khan's imperial Borjigin clan? Well, that means Timur could never really be the Mongol emperor, legitimately. And I know what you're thinking, why does he care about legitimacy if he's the strongest? Well, we're going to discover that legitimacy was super important for Timur. So he tried really hard to root his legitimacy as a leader in his connection to the great Mongol Empire, even marrying the wife of his fallen friend turned foe Hussein, since she was descended from Genghis himself. Since he couldn't be the Khan, he settled for Emir, the Arabic word for prince. But he would go on to become much more than a mere prince. Starting off with Herat in Afghanistan in 1383, Timur focused on Persia. When the city refused to surrender, he destroyed the city and massacred its inhabitants. This was to become a trait, cities refusing to surrender and consequently being sacked. Over the next decade, he was able to take over all of Persia as well as overrunning Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Mesopotamia. A particularly brutal example of his justice in this period was handed out in 1387 to the citizens of Esfahan, which was already covered in our video on Esfahan. The city had
So, in a way, kind of like the Huns and the Mongols before them.
surrendered in good fashion without fighting, but when its inhabitants revolted against Timur's taxes and killed his tax collectors, Timur massacred the citizens, erecting a pyramid of skulls which,
Even though the Huns and the Mongols, they'd just done it anyway. For the most part, supposedly.
consisted of 28 towers with 1,500 heads each. In the first half of the 1390s, Timur had to deal with one of his most troubling foes, Tokhtamesh, who had earlier been a protege of his. In fact, he was the one that put Tokhtamesh on the throne of the Golden Horde. 2 times Timur had to invade Tokhtamesh's realm in Russia in 1391 and in 1395. Both times Timur won decisively. The second time would be the last time his former protege would cause him trouble directly, although he lingered on for a while longer. In 1395, Timur also captured Moscow as well. But now it was time to discover new settings. And like a son who wishes to upstage his father, Timur was always comparing himself to Genghis, who had been unable to secure the rich lands of northern India. So in 1398, with his excuse of the Muslim Delhi Sultanate being too lenient to its Hindu subjects firmly in hand, Timur crossed the Indus River and achieved what neither Genghis nor Alexander the Great could. He conquered Delhi. But in order to do so, he had to rely upon his military genius. Standing before him, Timur's enemy had a...
Well, I believe Alexander the Great also had to deal with a possible, I'd say, mutiny from his own soldiers, because from Macedonia, well, Greece and Macedonia, his troops were becoming a bit disillusioned, and also they missed home, so that could be it was a defining factor to help, and also false, rumors about what they were going to encounter in India, which kind of also convinced Alexander to turn his army around back towards Greece and Macedonia.
force of war
before his death.
elephants. Normal for Indian warfare, but this made Timur's men very afraid because they were not used to the sight of these humongous animals that were literally made for warfare, kitted out with chainmail and poison tusks. So Timur ordered his men to build trenches in order to give them a sense of security as well as to block the war elephant's charge. He then loaded camels with wood and hay that were then set on fire, so that when the elephants charged, his men could prod the camel with iron sticks and then they would run in the direction of the elephants screaming in pain. Timur likely understood that elephants were easily panicked. You know, the whole elephants being scared of mice and everything. The elephants were frightened by the prospect of screaming camels on fire, as you would be, so they turned back and stampeded their own men. Timur then capitalized at this moment and got a very easy victory. Now, Timur's Indian campaign was particularly bloody. Even before he reached Delhi, he was forced to execute 100,000 captives he had taken along the way that was slowing him down on his journey to Delhi. Once he won the battle against the Delhi Sultanate and entered the city, the citizens rose up and fought back. Timur then ordered a massacre which would overshadow anything he had ever done before, killing the citizens and leaving their bodies as food for the birds. Delhi was destroyed so bad that it would take almost a century before it could recover to the levels it was at. He took tons of treasure back with him to his capital Samarkand. In fact, he even needed 90 elephants to carry back stones from quarries which would be used to erect beautiful monuments in his capital, like the Bibi Khanum Mosque. Before the end of 1399, Timur set westward towards the Middle East for his last and greatest expedition, one which would bring him at odds with two other dominant Islamic powers and culminate in a battle for the ages. Along his way, he restored his authority over the Caucasus region, which was particularly harsh for Georgia, a Christian nation in a mainly Muslim region. In Syria, he was to fight the first of the two dominant Middle Eastern powers, the Mamluks of Egypt and Syria. He took the two principal cities, Aleppo and Damascus, the latter of which afforded him a sit-down with Ibn Khaldun, also covered in our video on the great medieval historian. Before his invasion of Anatolia, he flattened Baghdad, ensuring that all of its buildings were destroyed, and of course it wouldn't be Timur if he didn't massacre its inhabitants, killing 20,000 people. In the meantime, Timur was trading insulting letters with his biggest rival, Sultan Bayezid of the Ottoman Empire. One letter from Bayezid stated, "If I fly from your arms, may my wives be divorced from my bed 3 times. But if you have no courage to meet me in the field, may you receive your wives after they have 3 times endured the embraces of a stranger." Whoa! The tension culminated in the Battle of Ankara in 1402, when Bayezid had to relieve his siege of Constantinople in order to face the new threat from the east. But Timur decisively defeated his rival after he secured the loyalty of some people within the Ottoman ranks, a characteristic Mongol strategy. Bayezid was captured and placed in a cage, eventually dying in captivity, after which his empire went through the Ottoman interregnum, an 11-year period where it looked like the Ottoman Empire was over before it really started to grow. If you want to know more about that epic battle, we've already covered it in a video before.
Sorry, I was
Continuing his Anatolian campaign, Timur successfully besieged Smyrna, which was controlled by the Knights Hospitallers, a remnant of the Crusades. Timur then went home to Samarkand to enjoy his spoils of war. But as his life story shows, he would soon become restless and yearned for another expedition. So he planned his next one, his most ambitious one yet. Having essentially conquered most of the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, and the Chagatai Khanate, he only had one territory left to become the supreme head of all Mongol territories, China. In 1404, he decided that was his next goal, so he set out in December of that year. But he could only get as far as Otrar, Kazakhstan, before he fell ill during a cold winter February, and so he died in 1405. After 3 decades of conquests and expansion, the great conqueror was finally laid to rest in his native Samarkand. His legacy is a conflicted one. Upon his death, his empire essentially fragmented, with his younger son Shah Rukh holding on to the main part of it until the middle of the 15th century. During Shah Rukh's reign, and with the help of his son Ulugh Beg, who was also a world-renowned astronomer and mathematician as well, the Timurid Renaissance took place, whereby great learning was facilitated in centers of learning such as Herat and Samarkand. This was definitely influenced by Timur, who in his conquest would always spare the scholars and artisans and subsequently bring them to Samarkand, where a proliferation of knowledge occurred. In time, his legacy would go on to inspire his great-great-great-grandson Babur and the rest of the Mughals to refer to themselves as Timurids. Today, in his native Uzbekistan and much of Central Asia, he is seen as a hero. But even there could be a city he destroyed like Khiva in Uzbekistan who will certainly bear resentment against him. The rest of the Islamic world is not particularly fond of him, understandably since he did bring destruction to Herat, Delhi, Balkh, Esfahan, Baghdad, Damascus and Aleppo. The West, strangely enough, has a very positive image of him for his victory over the Ottomans who had been making inroads into the Balkans and were seriously raising the suspicion of European kingdoms. Shakespeare's colleague Marlowe wrote the play Tamerlane the Great, and the American poet Edgar Allan Poe's first published poem was about Tamerlane. So what can we learn from this great man? Let's start off with the positives. He was a man of tremendous pragmatism. Some people would like to ascribe his planned invasion of China as an emotional reaction to him being treated as a typical vassal of the Chinese court. And his detainment of the Chinese embassy at Samarkand in 1395 in response to being called a vassal certainly helps this theory. But it fails to mention that Timur had been cool with that kind of relationship for years before 1395. It is likely that he always planned to attack China, since it was a former Mongol territory, and he only started showing aggression when he had taken care of his other issues. I know the quality of pragmatism is sometimes vilified for its instinctive association with Machiavellianism, but in order to be pragmatic requires an incredible amount of energy, restraint, foresight, and swallowing of the ego. The fact that he respected the circumstances of not being from royal blood, and that throughout his reign his official title was nothing more than Amir or Prince is remarkable considering he defeated every Sultan, Emperor, Khan and King put before him. To practice pragmatism requires a certain degree of mastery of the self. Secondly, Timur's life story reaffirms the importance of taking care of the foundations first and then focusing on growth. Considering the grandeur of Timur's conquests upon his death, stretching from the Mediterranean in the west to Delhi in the east, it makes it easy to forget that his greatest victories all occurred in the last 10 years of his life. Definitively defeating Tokhtamesh of the Golden Horde in 1395, capturing Delhi in 1398, defeating the Mamluks at Aleppo in 1400 and Damascus in 1401, and finally crushing the Ottomans at Ankara in 1402, before old age caught up to him in 1405. From the 1360s until the 1390s, he was involved in consolidating his authority in his region, and then later expansion into Persia and Afghanistan. So it was not necessarily the allure of his greatest pinnacles which forged him into the epic conqueror he is remembered to have been. Rather, it was the come-up. You know, the time he had to spend surviving as a mercenary when he was kicked out of his homeland. Understanding how he had to juggle the joint task of accommodating both his nomadic supporters as well as the settled elements of big cities. And just the overall way he had to figure out how he was to become a badass amongst badasses even though he was a cripple. But of course there are negative lessons to be learnt as well. Putting aside the whole massacring of whole cities and making skull pyramids, we all know that's not cool, but even from a strategic point of view, it is not the best method to instill your authority over people. Don't get me wrong, it works, but only in the short term. There's no way it can be a long-term measure of ensuring authority. You're gonna run out of people to kill. This brings me to what I think is the biggest shortcoming of Timur. He didn't leave much behind. Even though I spoke of the Timurid Renaissance after his death, I mean specifically in the way of institutions which could ensure political stability in the regions he had conquered. During his lifetime, he often had to resort to reconquering areas that he had already overrun. And after his death, this is most obvious by the fact that his empire basically disintegrated. So focused on looting, he failed to consider the medium to long-term consequences of his conquests. And that is not a great man's trait, to think only in the short term. We spoke before about pragmatism requiring foresight, but in this sense, Timur's foresight failed him. In any case, he had a hell of a ride whilst he was alive. I want to thank you all for joining me today, and a special thank you goes out to our newest patron, Omar, for supporting the growth of the channel. If you want to contribute, the link is in the bio to this video. If there's a certain topic that you guys would like to see covered, let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to get on.
And that'll do it. This has been it's been an interesting video. This is from Hikmah History, so feel free to check them out if you're interested. And Not much more I can say. So if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.